Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Ghost. We are in the middle of chapter 3. Sadly, we have an incident that got Ghost in trouble, and he has been suspended for the rest of the day, probably because the principal's taken a little bit of pity on him. But he did say he had to call his mother, and Ghost said he couldn't, but he could call his uncle, and then he called the coach. Why are you calling me? And why don't you call your... But before Coach could even finish his sentence, he answered his own question. Oh, I see. Kid, you're already killing me. I glanced up at Principal Marshall again. He was getting antsy, and I knew I only had a few seconds before he snatched the phone. Turns out I had even less than a few seconds. Give me the phone, Principal Marshall said, getting up and grabbing it from me. And then he aired everything out. Hello, Principal Marshall here. Is this Castle's uncle? I dropped my head and waited to be pretty much body slammed. Yes. Well, I need him off the premises as soon as possible just for the day. Principal Marshall sat on the edge of his desk waiting for me to look him in the eye, but I wouldn't. I just looked around the office at all the posters that said stuff like excellence and discipline, and he had pictures of past students, probably kids who did excellent things, disciplined things, things like holding ribbons at science fairs, clutching a trophy, some kid giving the camera a thumbs up like a cornball. Probably all good students, not kids like me. Mr. Marshall was uh-huh-ing Coach. I see, okay. Then he handed the phone back to me, but Coach had already hung up. Principal Marshall walked back behind his desk and took a seat. What did he say? I asked, bracing for the slam. He said he'd be here in a minute, but it would probably be the worst mistake ever to smile, but I was sure I wanted to. I sat there in the office while the principal went on about his business, flipping through folders, clicking at something on his computer, scribbling in a notepad, when I finally asked him about the pictures of different students on the walls. Who are those kids? I asked, biting a fingernail. I must have snagged it in the scuffle. Principal Marshall looked up from his busy work. You don't get to ask me any questions until tomorrow, he snapped. His tone was sharp, and I could tell he wasn't playing. I don't want to hear your voice. Your job right now is to sit there and wait for your uncle. You got it? I just nodded and sank into myself. Thankfully, it wasn't too long before Coach came marching back up the hallway. The look he gave me was so bad, just as bad as the look that Mr. Marshall had given me, which were the looks that my mom gave me whenever I was in these situations. The I'm so disappointed in you look, which is way worse than the I'm mad look. I'm here to get Castle, Coach said to the secretary, Mrs. Dickinson. Okay, just sign him out, she said. Coach scribbled something on a piece of paper, checked his watch, jotted the time down, met the principal, shook his hand, apologized to him for what I did, and we were out of there. On the way down the hall, Coach didn't say a thing. Not a word. But as soon as we got into the cab, he lit me up. What were you thinking telling those people I'm your uncle? Do you know that's probably against the law? I'm not sure if it is or if it isn't, but it probably is. And if it is, you got me here committing crimes. I've known you for 1 day. 1 day, and I just kidnapped you? I kept quiet because Coach was really mad. Plus, I was super grateful that he came and got me, and I didn't want to say anything to mess that up. Shoot, he might have turned around and took me back to the school if I said the wrong thing. Then finally, after a few minutes, he calmed down a little and asked, What happened anyway? I got in a fight. I stared out the window as we passed Mr. Charles's store. Care to elaborate? Coach pried. Okay, so there's this dude, Brandon Simmons. He's always getting on me about my mom and where I live and how I look and all that. And today, I just couldn't take it no more. I faced Coach. He glanced at me and then back to the road. So I jumped on him, beat him down. And what, you think that makes you tough? Coach scoffed. I thought about it for a second. I don't know. Does that make it right? He asked. What is it about adults that make them all just say the same things? Like they all studied the same book about grown-upness and memorizing phrases like, does that make it right? And be the bigger person? I just shrugged. I spoke with my shoulders. I kind of wanted to say yes. Yes, me punching Brandon in the face makes it right because he had been begging for it forever. It made it right for everybody, he joked on, and those kids would have given me their honor roll certificates for what I did. But that wasn't the answer Coach was looking for, but man, that's how I felt. Coach drove through town, and eventually we ended up at Martin Luther King Park. He said that since I'd cost him a half day's worth of fares, the front seat wasn't even all that junky yet, I would have to make it up to him by putting in extra work at the track, which was fine with me. Coach grabbed his whistle and clipboard from the glove compartment. Okay, here's how you're spending your suspension. We got us 3 hours before practice. We're going to use that time to get you caught up on the way this all goes. How all what goes? Being on my team, boy. I could tell he was still irritated, but not as much as he had been. We headed over to the track, the bright white lines marking out the red lanes, the green field in the middle. Okay, so first things first. Where's your practice clothes? Coach asked. These are them, I said. You have on jeans and high tops, he stated the obvious. I looked at myself. There was a stain on my sneakers, a new one, maybe ketchup or chocolate milk. So, I said, what's wrong with that? Coach sat down on a bench, stretched his legs out. You know what? Don't worry about it. We'll figure that out later. Let's just start with some stretching. Apparently, there was a whole slew of different kinds of stretches, and Coach showed me how to do them all. Each one was for a different reason. This one for this part of the leg, this one for that part of the leg, another one for your back, then jumping jacks, toe touches, push-ups. It all seems silly to me, but not as silly as the next part, the 2-lap warm-up jog. Me and Coach bounced around the track, him telling me to keep my arms tucked, which was actually hard to do. He said form is everything when it comes to running, and that it has more to do with form than how fast your legs are. That didn't sound right. To me, it sounded as if my arms were tucked, but my legs weren't moving fast. Then I wasn't going to be beating nobody, just common sense. But then again, I didn't think a 2-lap jog, as slow as you were jogging, would get me going. But by the time we finished, I was pouring sweat. Good, good, he said as we got back to the bench. He bounced around on his toes like a boxer before finally setting down. Feels good, don't it? I wiped my face with my shirt and took a seat. I was tired and energized at the same time, which was weird. I didn't do it to make me feel tough, I blurted out of nowhere. Coach stopped bouncing. He sat down next to me and grabbed a towel from his bag. What are you talking about? He asked, wiping sweat from his bald head, or like buffing it off. What you asked me in the car, if beating up Brandon makes me tough, I reminded him. I said I didn't know, but I do. Hold on. We locked eyes. The answer is no, it don't make me tough. Coach moved the towel from his head to his neck. So what does it make you then? I don't know, but not tough. I thought for a minute. Because for something to make you feel tough, you got to be a little bit scared of it at first, then you got to beat it. But I wasn't scared of Brandon at all. He's just a big guy with a big mouth. That ain't really all that scary to me. I had been thinking about this when we were running around the track, warming up. In between Coach's tips about form and all that stuff, my brain was kicking that question around. Let me guess, Coach said, now flinging the towel over his shoulders. You're one of those kids who ain't scared of nobody or nothing. Nah, I chuckled just for a second because I knew those kinds of kids that Coach was talking about. The kids who say they ain't scared, but really be scared of everything. Kids like Brandon. He talked all that trash and teased people because he was shook. A cupcake. But that's not me. I ain't saying that. I've definitely been scared of somebody before. Real scared, I added, thinking about how loud a gun sounds when it's fired in a small room. That's how come I know how to run so fast. But now the only person I'm scared of, other than my mother, I mean, like to do things I know ain't cool. But even though I know they ain't cool, like beating on Brandon, all of a sudden I'm doing it anyway, you know? So I guess the only other person I'm really scared of maybe is me. A grunt seeped from Coach. He rubbed his right knee. I hear you, kid, he said, wincing, stretching out his right leg, bending it, and then straightening it. Then he did the same to the left. Trouble is, you can't run away from yourself. Coach snatched the towel from his shoulder, folded it into a perfect square, and set it in the space between us. Unfortunately, he said, ain't nobody that fast. And we're going to stop there.